Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the latest addition to the fleet. Alright, so here's what we've got. It is a Triumph Speed Triple. As you can tell, it's a 2011 1050cc inline 3 naked sport bike. I am a huge fan of nakeds. I think they look fantastic. I've had multiple Triumph Street Triples, 675 and 765 ones, which are relatively similar looks wise, but slightly less power. Always wanted one of these, and this is my first one. And naturally, I bought it from my favorite place to buy cars and bikes, Copart. And if you know anything about Copart, vehicles there are usually, how would I put this, less than perfect. This bike showed up on Copart as vandalized, which in my experience usually means that somebody tried to steal it. And that theory actually seems to check out because we have a broken ignition cylinder. Now, if you look right here, this is where we would insert our key. And this little ignition switch is what actually turns and activates our starter instruments. Basically, every electrical component gets activated with this switch. If that switch is not turned, the bike will be, as it is right now, completely brain dead. None of our instruments light up, none of our buttons work, everything is dead. Now, in some bikes, especially older ones, if you were to do that and rotate that switch by hand without the key, it would allow you to start the motorcycle. Now, if you steal bikes, then please don't and just exit out of this video. But if you don't, if you turn this switch, as you can see, our instruments turn on. However, if you take a closer look on the cluster, you will see this little bell icon lit up. And that means that our immobilizer is activated, meaning that even if we turn our kill switch on, push in our clutch, and press the starter button, nothing happens. It doesn't even click. Chances are this is exactly what Copart did when they got the motorcycle. They did that, they tried to start it, nothing happened, and they marked it as a non-run and drive motorcycle. But because I have experience with this exact thing, I know that some of these bikes will have immobilizers, meaning that without the key, the bike will not start, because inside our key, there is a chip that activates our immobilizer and tells it that everything is good. So now if I insert our chip key into the ignition cylinder, the part that's still attached, and then go to the bottom part, the switch that's broken off, and now if we look at the cluster, that bell icon is no longer lit up, meaning that if everything goes according to plan, all we have to do is pull in our clutch and we have a perfectly running and riding motorcycle, which is great news because I bought this thing for a $900 bid. If you know Copart, there are additional fees you will have to pay whenever you buy anything from there. But with those fees included, I paid approximately $1,300 for this motorcycle, which I think is a fantastic deal, even though this is not the only issue that we have. A bike like this would be worth approximately $5,000 on private seller marketplace, and $1,300 is a steal considering that our only other issues are these terribly spray painted headlights that look god awful, and I don't know who and why decided to do this. The front turn signals are, well, they have seen better days. Now the turn signals are likely, well, there's a possibility the turn signals are the fault of the transporters. So after the previous owner came out to his bike, found the ignition cylinder broken, found out that somebody tried to steal it. That's most likely what happened. I'm kind of speculating, but that is a pretty common scenario. He called his insurance, and his insurance totaled the bike. And after that, probably at least one transporter loaded this bike up and brought it to Copart. At which point, I think these front turn signals are very likely to break. However, this one has some electrical tape on here already, so potentially that was already an issue. Next, we do have one of the mirrors, which honestly seems to be in okay condition. It's a little scraped out, but nothing too bad. I know some sport bike riders like to delete their mirrors. They kind of do look a little bulky, but the functionality, I don't know. I like the functionality of mirrors. We have a second key. We have the back of this cluster. I'm assuming maybe they took this off, maybe they broke this off, trying to bypass the immobilizer somehow. I'm not sure what they were trying to achieve by taking this off, but luckily, they achieved nothing. This is probably the most expensive part that I'm gonna have to buy for this bike, which I guess is good news because we could have been in a much worse situation. Luckily, we still have the bolts, and what's really frustrating about this is that this cover was present on the bike in the Copart pictures. So I'm assuming somebody had taken it off to jumpstart the bike, see if it turns on and whatnot, and they probably set this aside somewhere and Copart had lost it. This thing was not with the bike when it was getting picked up, and as unfortunate as that is, I guess I just have to swallow it. This is not supposed to be this tilted down, as you can tell by this gap too. Like this is not right. But I've already tested this bike. I've ridden it around and it rides quite well. I didn't see any significant issues and I absolutely love the way it looks. The headlights are this is a controversial topic for a lot of non-Triumph people especially. Most people don't love the design of this headlights and I don't enjoy it as much as I could, I will admit. But newer generation 2016 Plus has slightly more rounded headlights that look really good and I actually do like that look. So I'm considering to potentially upgrade these headlights to that newer generation one just to clean up this front end and make it look a little nicer since we are gonna have to get rid of this paint anyway. Speaking of, we might as well try and do that now. I'm using a Goo Gone graffiti remover, which is safe on plastics, because if you were to use paint thinner or something like this, like headlights or any other plastics, you would find out that paint thinner is extremely harsh on plastics and it makes them bubble up and get brittle, and basically just don't do that. I learned that the hard way. We're just gonna let this soak on there and hopefully this is gonna wipe off, and if it doesn't, maybe I'll just spend the extra money and buy us newer generation headlights. While that stuff is soaking, we might as well replace our turn signals. And yes, as you can see, we do have some plastics that are damaged. I mean, this is not that big of a deal. I can live with that, but I will most likely fix it. I'm gonna try and avoid buying new ones because it's just gonna be more expensive than it's worth, and I don't feel like spending that kind of money on something this simple that's not really functional and is there just for looks. Now this back side is just an grommet, so we can pull that out. So something I should have done right away is just use paper towels for this Goo Gone stuff because it frequently just drips off and you want it to remain on the headlight for as long as possible so that it actually dissolves the paint. So something I like to do when replacing these stock turn signals is retain this little flange here, because if you don't, there's gonna be this empty hole in the fairing where you're supposed to have your bolt, which I'm not a fan of. So I'm gonna retain the flange and the bolt and then just mount our new turn signal to this. Another thing I would like to retain is our stock connectors, because they're much better at connecting to the other side of this. All right, let's connect them and see if they actually work. Okay, that's not bad. Now let's see if we manage to get rid of our paint on the headlights. If you're 17 years old and you have a bike and you're thinking about doing this to your headlights, please don't. Just wait like 5 years and I promise you, you're gonna change your mind. All right, that wasn't as bad as I expected it to be. And luckily, we're all set. I do have a completely unreasonable obsession with removing all kinds of stickers. I can't stand them, so yeah, these have to go. Now here's the little tank cover piece that I had bought from eBay because it was significantly cheaper than the white ones that are intact. As you can see, this one has a bit of a missing piece here, which I'm hoping to fix with, drumroll, a $2, even less than $2 piece of PVC cap. And this is hopefully going to help us fix this, as well as this side fairing here. As you can see, this is slightly curved and we're hoping this radius is gonna match that. And we're gonna plastic weld this in place and hopefully it's gonna look acceptable. Now, if you're not familiar with plastic welding, it's a very simple process. So this guy here, that's pretty cheap and you can find it in the description below, basically sends current through this piece of metal, heats it up, and we use that to sort of melt the plastic into shape and into places we want it to be. So I'm gonna start with this plastic piece here that luckily doesn't need any plastic to be added. We simply just need to kind of put it back together in one piece. So to do that, we can use either this to use the existing plastic to melt it together, or alternatively, we can just take this guy off and use these staples to embed them into the plastic. So while the paint is drying on our tank cover, we'll see how this turns out. It looks really bumpy now. I don't know if it's gonna get better. In reality, it doesn't really matter. I personally am not like super meticulous about the plastics. It's a over 10-year-old bike, a 13-year-old bike at this point. It's not gonna be perfect, but that plastic over here definitely didn't turn out good whatsoever. I just ordered a used replacement. It has imperfections, but I think it's better than what we have. It was $100, and I think it's a much better option than me trying to fill this in and send this down and fill this in and send this down and then spray it, and not worth the trouble of trying to fix that. So we have a new one on the way. So I think all we have left is to fix our ignition cylinder. I also need to replace these levers. They are also on the way. Let's fix our ignition cylinder. This is gonna be a bit of a pain in the butt. This is something I was avoiding because I don't enjoy doing this. Reason being is that step one of fixing this is removing it. And as you can tell right in there, this is how it's secured to the frame, or not the frame, but you know, this triple tree assembly. So there's two of these bolts that are shear bolts, meaning that when they get installed, I think they just break off like the thing that they screw it in with. Long story short, it's a bolt that's not meant to be able to be removed, and we have to drill it out. So we have to drill off the head. Luckily, the actual threads inside the triple tree in here are for a normal bolt, so all we have to do is just replace it with a regular bolt and we'll be fine. And this is the result we're looking for. As you can see, the head of the bolt is now gone and this side is free. We still have a little bit of drilling to do on the other side. All right, looks like we got her out. This piece broke off, which is not entirely my fault because I definitely saw there being a crack in this metal flange. So I'm assuming once I unbolted it, that was just the final push that it needed to fall apart. Regardless, in theory, this guy should just come right out. We just gotta fish it around the wiring and our brake lines, and here we go. All right, this is what we're looking at, and I'm not really gonna try and fix this too hard because there's not really a whole lot we can do without replacing this thing, and replacing it is very expensive. Well, to an extent, because first of all, the ignition switch itself would be at least a few $100 with a key from eBay off of like a crashed bike or something. You would have to have this programmed to the current ECU in the bike. So unless I buy the whole assembly with the switch, immobilizer, and ECU, I'm gonna have to have this coded by a dealer to the ECU if I were to replace this with a new switch and a new key. So what I think I'm gonna do is put this back in one piece as well as I can and mount it back up. Just as long as it's not falling apart, as long as we can just turn our key and go, that's all I really need this to do. After some strategic placement of electrical tape, here we have a switch that is in one piece and seems to work. Beautiful. I mean, I did my best to wrap this around very generously to make it more or less waterproof. Now this next part is probably the hardest. I have to remove the remainder of the bolts that I drilled out that no longer have a head to grab onto. So I had no choice but to actually weld on a nut to those studs because they did not want to come out otherwise. And yeah, as scary as this looks, luckily we didn't melt anything on the bike and we didn't have to do a whole lot of welding, and both of them came out, and this is what they look. And that's it, friends. There's really not that much I needed to do on this bike. Luckily, I did manage to get a few rides in before winter started. This bike is absolutely awesome. The handling is just as good as it was on the Speed Triples. It doesn't feel much heavier, but the power increase is incredibly, just so noticeable. Considering that I'm coming from the 1983 Honda Magna, that's the latest bike I was riding before I got this one. I mean, the difference is just night and day. In fact, I think this bike is just so good that I'm nowhere near its capabilities. I'll be the first to admit that I'm not that good of a rider. After all, I live in this farmland where there's not many turns or mountains. There's no fun roads to be on except this one. This is like the most fun road I know of within like a 30-mile radius. I'm not rich enough to go to the track a lot or ever, and I don't really get a chance to improve my riding skills as much as I would like. And this bike is just so freaking good that whatever I do cannot touch its capabilities. It's almost like the Porsche 911 GT3 RS. Like, you frequently hear people saying that this car is so good and so good at handling that you don't have as much fun driving it because it just does everything you could possibly have it do and you cannot outdrive it. Same thing here. This bike feels like it's on a rail and I'm afraid of pushing it further because I don't have the balls for it. Hopefully one day I'll be able to get to this bike's level. But regardless, for $900, I cannot complain. Thank you very much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this video. You have a great day.